Hey there, and welcome to Family Revenge. We're so glad you're here. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you can stay with us for every twist and turn. Let's jump right in. I walked into the venue, my heels clicking on the marble floor, the sharp scent of expensive flowers overwhelming my senses. It was a lavish affair, too extravagant for what was supposed to be a somber occasion. But this was my grandmother's wake, and apparently, grief needed to come with a designer tag. I adjusted the simple black dress I wore, its fabric soft and modest, not that anyone would notice. Everyone else here seemed to glow in their luxury. Laura, my cousin, stood nearby, her platinum blonde hair perfectly styled, her red dress hugging her frame like it had been tailored for the occasion. Sarah, she called, her voice too loud, too sweet. You're here. She gave me a once-over, her eyes narrowing in judgment. You could have made more of an effort, you know? It's a big day for the family. I fought the urge to roll my eyes. I think it's respectful, don't you? I kept my voice neutral, but I knew she heard the edge in it. Respectful? Sure, she said, crossing her arms. But it's also an important family event. You could at least look like you belong here. I didn't bother to respond. She didn't get it, but why would she? The rest of them didn't get me. I had worked hard to be invisible in this crowd, to not draw attention to the fact that I didn't fit into their perfect, polished lives. I was the black sheep, the one who worked at a bookstore while they built their empires, all with their shiny suits and million-dollar contracts. The sharpest sting came from the knowledge that they thought I was barely scraping by. They had no clue about my real success. That would be the day they finally recognized me, and I wasn't about to give them that satisfaction now. I grabbed a drink from a passing waiter and walked off to the edge of the room, leaning against the wall, letting the conversation swirl around me. The family's voices, fake and polished, echoed in the background. They barely noticed I was there. Or maybe they just preferred not to. I stayed by the wall, trying to fade into the background as much as I could. The hum of voices around me, the clinking of glasses, the laughable pretense of grief. This was my family, the same group that had never understood me. I felt the weight of their eyes on me, even when they weren't looking directly. Did you hear about Sarah? Aunt Julie's voice cut through the noise, pitched just loud enough to catch my attention. I stiffened, but didn't turn around. I knew this was going to be bad. She's just wasting herself, Aunt Julie continued, her voice dripping with disdain. Such a smart girl, and yet she's stuck in that bookstore, barely getting by. What a shame. I clenched my jaw. They all assumed I was struggling. They had no idea how much I made, how much I'd built from the ground up. I could tell them, but I wouldn't. They'd never see it for what it was. My success, my choice, my way of living. To them, it was all failure. You know, it's funny, Aunt Julie went on. Mark's been promoted again. Another step up. They just gave him a raise too. He's doing so well. Mark, my older brother, the golden child, always had the perfect life, at least in their eyes. I could picture him now, holding court in the middle of the room, talking about his financial consulting job like it was the cure for cancer. I'm not surprised, Aunt Julie continued. That kid's going places. I don't know why Sarah can't get it together. Such a shame. I really thought she'd do something bigger with her life. I was so tired of hearing this, of them thinking I was stuck because I didn't play the same game they did, that I was somehow less because I didn't follow the path they approved of. Did you hear about Mark's salary? My Uncle Tom joined in, his voice low, as if he was sharing a secret. He's making bank. Another six-figure jump. I hated the way they spoke about money like it was the ultimate measure of success. They'd never understand that I didn't need the flashy cars or the designer clothes to feel accomplished, but that was all they could see. I spotted Mark now, standing by the bar, laughing with some colleagues. His suit was too sharp, his smile too rehearsed. Yeah, good for him, I muttered to myself, trying to keep the bitterness from taking over. But it still seeped through, like a slow leak I couldn't plug. I wanted to leave, to step out of this whole charade and just go home where things made sense. But I couldn't. Not now. Not when I was still clinging to the last shreds of my mother's memory. She'd been my only real support, the only one who ever believed in me. And now she was absent, a shadow of the woman she used to be. Illness had taken her, bit by bit. I missed her. I missed the way she'd make me feel like I wasn't a disappointment. Now I was alone in this, stuck in a family that only saw the failures they thought I'd been stuck with. She's so lucky. Aunt Julie was still talking, oblivious to the fact that I was standing there. She doesn't have to worry about money like we do. If only they knew. If only they could see the truth, but they wouldn't. They were too far gone in their perfect lives to even ask about mine. I wanted to scream at them, to tell them what I'd built, to show them all the businesses I ran, all the quiet success I'd accumulated while they patted themselves on the back for their promotions and salaries. But I didn't. I just stood there, looking at my family, seeing them for the shallow, entitled people they were, and feeling the familiar sting of their judgment. It wasn't new, it wasn't surprising, but it still hurt. And somewhere, deep down, I was starting to wonder how much longer I could keep playing their game, how much longer I could stay hidden in plain sight. I left the wake, the oppressive weight of my family's judgment still hanging around me, and headed back to my apartment. The city was quieter now, the rush of the day fading into the hum of streetlights and distant cars. The apartment was a short drive away, the kind of place people would walk past and never think twice about. Small, simple, too small, really. But it suited my purpose. When I opened the door, I didn't immediately feel relief like I expected. I'd spent so many years working to stay hidden, to play the part of the quiet failure, and it was starting to wear on me. My apartment was furnished sparsely, just the essentials: a couch, a small dining table, a few bookshelves. It looked like what people assumed I could afford, what they would expect, but no one could ever know the truth. I kicked off my shoes, walked over to my desk, and checked my phone. A new message from Laura popped up on the screen. "Hey Sarah, I really need your help. I'm having trouble finding a decent job. Things are tight and I don't know what to do anymore. Can you help me out?" My fingers hovered over the keyboard, the words floating in front of me. How many times had I helped her and my family without them even knowing? It was always the same: expectations with no appreciation. I had bailed them out countless times, yet no one knew how much I'd done. No one knew how much I'd given them behind their backs. I could easily give Laura what she wanted, of course. I could leverage my network, point her in the right direction, and set her up with a few high-paying connections. But that would mean admitting to her that I was far more than they thought I was. I couldn't do that. Not yet. Not with the way they saw me. I ran a hand through my hair and leaned back in my chair, looking at the apartment around me. It was nice, I guess, comfortable, but nothing about it screamed success. No one would ever guess I owned the building. They would never suspect that my companies, my online retail brands, my tech ventures were quietly raking in millions each year. I ran them all from behind a screen, tucked away in the shadows. I could have moved. I could have bought a mansion, gone to family events in my flashy cars, and let everyone know exactly what I'd built. But that would have meant opening up the floodgates to their expectations, their jealousy, their belittling. They'd never accept me as I was. Not truly. They'd still see me as the disappointment, even if I was worth more than all of them combined. I glanced at the message from Laura again. Her life was falling apart, but she didn't know that I could change it all with a few calls. It made my stomach twist. I could help her. I could help them all. But if I did, it would be like handing them the keys to the kingdom, and they'd never see me as more than the person who saved them. They wouldn't understand the quiet empire I'd built. I typed out a quick response to Laura, keeping it vague, playing the role they expected. "I'll see what I can do. But you know it's not easy right now for anyone. You'll have to keep pushing." I hit send, then set my phone down. I wanted to shout out the truth, to tell them all how wrong they were about me, but I knew that revealing myself now would make everything worse. My family had their perfect little world. I was the thorn in their side, and if they ever found out how far I'd come, I feared they'd never accept me, because their version of success wasn't mine. I'd been living this double life for so long, I was starting to forget what it felt like to be open, to be seen for who I really was. I could see it in their eyes every time they looked at me like I was a lost cause. I sat there for a moment, the weight of it all pressing down. There was a part of me that wanted to tear the mask off, to show them everything, to finally stop pretending. But there was another part of me, the one that had been forced into the shadows for so long, that knew the cost would be too high. I sighed, the exhaustion finally catching up with me. Tomorrow was another day, another chance to play the role they expected of me. For now, I just had to keep the mask on. The next day, I found myself heading to my parents' house for the usual Sunday brunch. The kind of thing where everyone pretended everything was fine, where they piled on the food and the fake smiles, and somehow no one ever really talked about anything that mattered. It was just part of the routine, like clockwork. I didn't want to go. The thought of spending another day trapped in that facade made my skin crawl. But there was no choice. It was expected. When I walked through the front door, I was greeted with the usual chorus of, Hey, Sarah, how's the bookstore? As if that question was still somehow the highlight of my life. I smiled tightly and nodded, making small talk with whoever was nearby. It wasn't long before I caught sight of Uncle Tom, sitting at the head of the table, his brow furrowed, his face pinched in the way it always was when he was anxious about something. He was talking to my cousin Laura, her face drawn tight. This isn't good, Laura, Uncle Tom was saying. I've been looking at the books, and the family finances are tighter than they've ever been. I don't know how we're going to keep this up. Laura, ever the optimist when it suited her, just shrugged. I'll figure it out, Uncle Tom. Things will get better. But they weren't going to get better. I could feel it. The strain that was just beneath the surface of their perfect, pristine lives. It was all unraveling, and no one seemed willing to face the reality of it. Not them, not me. I took a seat at the far end of the table, avoiding direct eye contact with anyone. They all thought I was the failure in the family, but I wasn't the one who was drowning in debt. I wasn't the one whose entire financial empire was crumbling from the inside out. Uncle Tom shook his head. I just don't know how we got here. And Laura, you need to stop running up these credit card bills. I'm serious. I'm trying, okay? She snapped, her tone defensive, but I could hear the panic beneath it. I'm working on it. I wanted to call out the lies, to tell them everything I knew, everything I could do to fix it. But I couldn't. Not when they refused to see the truth. They wouldn't ask for help. They were too proud. And the truth was, I couldn't help them without it changing everything, without them knowing everything. I turned my attention to the side, where I caught my father in a quiet conversation with Mark. My father was once the backbone of this family, a pillar of strength. But the man I saw now was a shadow of that version. He'd been struggling with his business for years, but never admitted it. Not to anyone, not even to me. I overheard him speaking to Mark, his voice low, almost a whisper. Mark, I don't know how much longer I can keep this up. The business is bleeding money, and we're not seeing the returns we used to. I can't keep pretending things are fine. Mark, always the picture of confidence, shook his head. You're being dramatic, Dad. The economy is tough right now, but we'll bounce back. You just need to adjust the investments. We'll get there. The worry in my father's eyes was impossible to miss, though. His pride was his downfall. He would never admit to anyone that his business had been slowly dying. He wouldn't even admit it to himself. Mark turned to his wife, then, still unaware that I was listening. It's bad. I've made some bad investments. I thought I could play the market and get a good return, but it's all going south. I'm trying to figure out how to salvage it before it all falls apart. I swallowed hard. Mark, always the one to brag about his promotions and six-figure bonuses, was in the same boat as everyone else, and I was the only one who could help. But none of them would ask. I looked around the room, at the well-dressed, perfectly polished family that I was supposed to be a part of. They all seemed fine on the outside, comfortable, confident, the embodiment of success. But it was all just a mask, a layer of paint on a house that was falling apart. I thought about what they would say if they knew I could bail them out, if I could fix everything in a moment. But I kept my mouth shut, just like I always did. The cracks in their perfect lives were growing wider with every passing day, and I knew they wouldn't acknowledge them until it was too late. So I sat there in silence, pretending to be just like them, playing my part in this never-ending performance. Because, in the end, it didn't matter how much I could help. They wouldn't accept it, not in the way I needed them to. They weren't ready for the truth. They weren't ready to see me for who I really was. I left my parents' house feeling more drained than I'd expected. Every Sunday brunch, it was the same thing. People pretending everything was fine when nothing was. I thought about what I'd overheard. My father's failing business, Mark's financial struggles, Laura drowning in debt. And yet they would never ask for help. They'd rather sink than admit they were wrong. I needed a distraction, so I headed to the office for one of my online fashion brands. The space was sleek, modern, and efficient. Everything my family would assume was a front for something small. I loved the irony of it. I sat down at my desk and fired up the computer. A flood of emails from suppliers, designers, and marketing teams hit my inbox. The company was gearing up for a big product launch, something that could catapult the brand into a whole new level of visibility. If everything went as planned, the buzz would be huge. It felt like a massive opportunity, a moment where I could step into the spotlight, finally show the world what I was really capable of. But the more I thought about it, the more I wanted to stay hidden, to remain just out of sight, operating in the background where no one could touch me. My family would never understand this world, and I wasn't ready to have them involved. It wasn't about their approval anymore. It was about protecting what I had built, keeping them out of my business, away from anything they could ruin with their pride. As I settled into work, my phone buzzed. It was Laura. Hey, Sarah, I don't know what to do. The job I thought was a sure thing just fell through, and I'm desperate. Could you help me find something better? I swear I'm trying, but nothing's sticking. I stared at the message for a few seconds, my fingers hovering over the screen. The urge to help her was there, of course. She was family, and no matter how much I resented their judgment, I couldn't turn my back on her completely. But helping her would mean telling her just how far ahead of her I was. It would mean opening up a world she'd never be able to comprehend. I took a deep breath and began typing, careful to keep my tone neutral, almost apologetic. I'm sorry, Laura. Things are really tight on my end too, you know? I'm barely keeping things afloat. I wish I could help more, but I just don't have the resources right now. I know it's tough. I hit send, not a second of hesitation. It was the game I'd been playing for so long. I'd let them all think I was struggling, that I was just scraping by while they built their perfect lives. I hated it. I hated lying to them. But the truth? That would shatter everything. It wasn't just about protecting my secrets. It was about keeping their perception of me in check. I couldn't risk them knowing what I really had. Not yet. I set the phone down and refocused on the screen, scanning through the latest design drafts. A new collection was in the works, more edgy, more daring than what we'd done before. I could feel the buzz already building, the potential in the air. If this launch went well, it could change everything. But as I was deep in thought, my mind still circling around my family's issues, another notification popped up on my phone. It was from Mark. He was texting me about something random, the kind of casual conversation we used to have before everything started to sour. I skimmed through it, not even feeling the desire to respond. A few minutes later, another message came in, this time from my assistant, alerting me that the marketing campaign for the tech company was set to launch in a few days. I froze. My tech company. The one I'd built from the ground up. The one that was about to hit a milestone that would put my name on the map. It was the company that could change everything for me. And it would do it in silence, without anyone knowing the true extent of what I'd done. I rubbed my temples, feeling the tension building in my chest. The desire to finally step into the light, to show everyone just how far I'd come, was intense. But I couldn't. Not yet. Instead, I sank back into my chair and took another deep breath, trying to calm the storm inside me. I was so close to breaking, so close to telling them everything, just so I wouldn't have to keep up the act. But there was too much at stake. I glanced back at the message from Laura. She was struggling, and I could help her. I could solve all their problems in an instant. But that wasn't the world I lived in anymore. They'd never ask for my help directly, not in the way I needed them to. They were too proud, too stuck in their own version of success. So I stayed quiet, played the role. I pressed forward with the launch, the campaign, and the quiet game I'd been playing for years. My family could keep thinking what they wanted. But deep down, I knew the truth. They were the ones who were really struggling, and I was the only one who had the power to change it. But they would never ask. They'd never see me for what I really was. The next morning, the phone calls started coming in, one after the other. I hadn't even had a chance to settle into my day before my father's name flashed on the screen. I almost didn't pick up, but the nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach told me I had no choice. Hey, Dad, I said, trying to keep my tone casual, despite the tension coiling in my chest. Sarah, he said, his voice tight, stressed. I need to ask you for a favor. I could hear the reluctance in his words, but there was no mistaking the urgency. I'm in a tough spot. The business is in trouble. I don't know where else to turn. I gripped the edge of my desk, the cold metal a reminder of how easily I could change things for him, how easily I could fix everything with a few simple steps. But I held my tongue. What's going on? He sighed heavily, his words coming out in a rush. We're down to the wire, Sarah. I'm short on cash, and I need $50,000. If I don't get it, the whole thing might collapse. I can't keep things running without it. His voice cracked just a little at the end, and I could hear how much it hurt him to admit this. But he wasn't admitting the real problem, that his pride, his refusal to see the cracks in the business, was what had led them here. 50,000? I repeated, trying to keep my voice steady. I knew the number was small change to me, but to him, it was everything. Dad, I don't know if I can come up with that. Lies. It came out of my mouth like it was nothing, but I couldn't give him the truth. I couldn't tell him that I had more than enough to save him, that I'd been quietly watching his empire crumble from the sidelines for years. Please, Sarah, he pleaded, the desperation rising in his voice. I don't have anyone else to ask. You're my last hope. My stomach twisted. I wanted to help him, but I couldn't. Not like this. Not when he'd never acknowledged the role he played in this mess. Not when the family would still see me as the failure, no matter how much I did. I'll see what I can do, I said finally, cutting him off before he could go on. But you need to start thinking about long-term solutions. You can't keep putting it off. He muttered something about figuring it out and hung up. I sat there for a minute, the weight of the call pressing down on me. My father had always been the patriarch of this family. To see him reduced to begging for money, it hurt, but I knew deep down that I couldn't give him what he wanted, not without it costing me more than I was willing to give. Before I could process what had just happened, my phone rang again. This time, it was Mark. Hey, sis, Mark said, trying to sound casual, but I could tell something was wrong in his voice. We need to talk. There's been a situation at work. I leaned back in my chair, the tension building again. What happened? He sighed, clearly not wanting to admit what was coming. It's bad. I made some investments that seemed solid at the time, but now we're in the middle of a corporate scandal. A few bad calls, and now the company's under investigation. I've been trying to keep things under control, but it's slipping. I don't know what to do. My heart sank. Mark, the golden boy, the one who always had it together, had messed up. I couldn't help but feel a little satisfaction in the fact that it wasn't just me anymore, but I didn't show it. Instead, I just kept listening. I'll talk to some people, I said, keeping my voice even. You'll figure it out. You've always landed on your feet before. Thanks, he said, his voice carrying a mix of relief and guilt. I'm just stressed, you know? I've got the weight of the whole company on my shoulders. I couldn't help it. My mouth twisted into something like a smirk, though I quickly wiped it away. The irony wasn't lost on me. Mark was dealing with a mess, but he had no idea that I was the one who could pull him out of it. If he only knew what I had going on behind the scenes, how I could fix everything for him. But I wouldn't. I couldn't. Not when they were too proud to accept anything from me. After that, the calls didn't stop. My Uncle Tom called next, asking for advice on refinancing some investments. Laura texted again, asking if I knew of any job openings, though her tone was less hopeful than before. They all thought I was in the same boat they were, scraping by, struggling to keep it all together. It made me sick to listen to them. I couldn't help but watch, from my quiet position in the background, as the cracks in their perfect lives widened. And I felt a strange kind of power in that. I had the resources to solve their problems. Hell, I could fix everything with a few phone calls, but they wouldn't ask me. They couldn't. Not when they thought I was still the same Sarah who worked at a bookstore. So I stayed silent. Let them scramble. Let them fall apart while I watched from the sidelines. It was the only way I could keep my secrets intact. And maybe, just maybe, it would teach them that they couldn't keep going on like this. Without realizing it, they were teaching me something too, that their pride would eventually be their downfall. And I'd be there, waiting in the wings, silently holding all the cards. The idea had been building for weeks, maybe even months, but I kept pushing it down, telling myself I wasn't ready. Yet every day that passed, every call from my father, every desperate text from Laura, it became harder to ignore. My family had no idea who I was, and they never would if I didn't show them. So I made the call. I rented out the conference room in one of my office buildings, a sleek high-rise downtown with floor-to-ceiling windows. The kind of place that screamed success, that would make my family's jaws drop. It was perfect. I hadn't told them where we were meeting, and I could feel the tension building as they trickled in, one by one. My father looked around, eyes widening, and I could see the judgment forming on his face before he even opened his mouth. Mark, of course, was too busy trying to look impressed to notice. Laura looked at the polished conference table with an almost vacant expression, like she was trying to figure out how she fit into all of this. Sarah, this place is impressive, Mark said, his voice laced with disbelief. But, why the big show? I didn't answer immediately. I wanted them to see, I wanted them to feel it, to understand just how far I had come. The same family who had written me off as a failure, who never stopped comparing me to Mark's six-figure salary and Dad's business acumen, would now be standing in the middle of everything they had overlooked. It felt good in a way, but there was still that sharp edge to it, the weight of their disappointment in me that I couldn't shake. Take a seat, I said, my tone firm but controlled. I've got something I need to tell all of you. They looked at each other, clearly confused, but they did as I said, settling into their chairs. My father was the last to sit, still looking around like he was trying to find the hidden cameras. I'm listening, he said finally, though there was a hint of defensiveness in his voice. I took a deep breath, letting the silence hang for a moment before I spoke. I'm not the person you think I am. There it was, the truth, laid bare. I felt it hanging between us like a live wire, the weight of what I was about to do pressing against my chest. I'm not just some underachiever working in a bookstore, I continued, meeting each of their eyes one by one. I've been building something you've never seen. I watched them exchange glances, trying to process what I was saying. They were used to thinking of me as the black sheep, the one who couldn't keep up. But here I was, in front of them, in a room full of power and money. Their confusion deepened, and I saw the skepticism in their eyes. They wouldn't believe me until I showed them. I own several businesses, I went on. One of them is a fashion brand. It's profitable. And then there's my tech company, which is about to launch a product that's going to make a major impact in the industry. I've been doing this for years, quietly, behind the scenes. The room fell into stunned silence. I could see their brains processing, the pieces falling into place. My father shifted uncomfortably, his eyes narrowing as he tried to make sense of it. Wait a minute, Mark said slowly. You're saying you've been making money all this time? All those years? And you never said anything? I nodded, keeping my voice steady. Not once, because you never asked. You've always seen me as the failure, the one who didn't make it. I couldn't change that perception, so I kept it all quiet. I could see the humiliation start to set in, but it wasn't the kind of apology I was hoping for. They were too proud to admit they'd been wrong about me. Instead, they scrambled, trying to piece together the reality I'd just laid out in front of them. You've been helping us all this time, my father said, the words catching in his throat, and we had no idea. I could hear the frustration in his voice, the disbelief. I've been paying off your debts, bailing you out when things got tight, even helping Mark with his investments when he didn't know what he was doing. I've been doing it without you ever knowing. I could see the struggle on their faces, the conflict between the anger of being exposed and the quiet realization that they had misjudged me. I wasn't the screw-up they thought I was. But I wasn't expecting a round of applause either. They couldn't let go of their pride that easily. Why didn't you just tell us? Laura asked, her voice quiet. We could have helped. You didn't have to do it alone. I shook my head. I didn't want your help. I didn't need it. I just needed you to stop looking at me like I wasn't enough. The room was thick with tension, their discomfort palpable. I wasn't sure what I expected from this. Maybe an apology, maybe an acknowledgement of how wrong they'd been. But I didn't get it, not in the way I wanted. Instead, I got silence. They were too proud to admit their mistakes fully, too invested in their own narratives to accept the truth. But I wasn't asking for them to change overnight. I was showing them that I wasn't the one who had failed. They had. They'd failed to see me for who I truly was, and now they couldn't ignore it. I stood there for a moment, letting it sink in. Then I took a step back, crossing my arms over my chest. You can't pretend anymore. I'm not the failure you thought I was. And I've been carrying you all for years, but I'm done hiding it. The silence hung in the air, but something had shifted. I could feel it. The first crack in their perfect facade. Finally, my father spoke again, his voice softer this time. What do we do now? I didn't have an easy answer, but for the first time, I realized I didn't need to. They would have to figure it out on their own, just as I had. The silence that followed my revelation felt like it had stretched out for hours. My family sat there, visibly uncomfortable, their faces a mix of shock, guilt, and pride. I watched them waiting for someone to say something, but no one spoke. I wasn't sure what I was expecting. Maybe an apology or some sign that they truly understood the extent of how wrong they'd been about me. But instead, the air in the room grew thicker with each passing second. It was my cousin Laura who spoke first. Her voice was quieter now, the usual defensive edge gone. Sarah, I'm sorry. She hesitated, the words coming slowly, like she was testing them out. I never knew. I've been so wrapped up in my own problems that I didn't realize how much you've been doing. I should have been more understanding. I looked at her, not sure how to respond. It wasn't the kind of apology I'd been waiting for, but it was something. She was still holding on to her pride, but there was a sincerity in her voice I hadn't expected. It's fine, I said, my tone neutral, though the words felt heavy in my mouth. You had your own struggles, but you need to understand something. I didn't do it for recognition. I did it because I thought you needed help. But I'm done being the invisible one, Laura. I'm done pretending that I don't have a seat at this table. She nodded, her eyes glistening with something like regret. I didn't know if she fully understood what I meant, but at least she was trying. That was more than I could say for the rest of them. My father shifted in his seat, clearing his throat. I I owe you an apology too, Sarah. He paused, his voice strained, as though the words were sticking in his throat. I've been too proud to admit that I've made mistakes. I've always thought I could handle everything on my own, and I've been wrong. I should have seen what you were doing, should have asked for help. I didn't know what to say to that. It wasn't the apology I dreamed of. Hell, it was hardly even an apology, but it was the closest he was going to get. His pride had always been his greatest strength and his biggest weakness, and it was clear that admitting fault still didn't come easily to him. But I had to give him credit. He was trying. I've always looked up to you, I said quietly. But you've got to realize, Dad, you can't do it alone. Not anymore. And you shouldn't have to. He didn't say anything more, but the guilt in his eyes was enough for me to know that he understood. Then there was Mark. Of course, he was the last to speak up. He always had to be the center of attention, always had to be in control. I could see the anger bubbling under the surface, mixed with something else. Embarrassment, maybe, or maybe it was shame. He looked at me, his jaw tight, like he was struggling to find the right words. I had no idea. I should have known. I've been so focused on my own shit that I didn't see how much you've been holding together. I took you for granted, Sarah. His words hung in the air, heavy and unspoken for a moment. I didn't trust myself to speak at first, not wanting to say something I'd regret. I could feel the old resentment stirring, the years of being the overlooked one. But this wasn't about that anymore. It couldn't be. You did, I said, my voice calm but firm. You've all taken me for granted. And maybe I let it happen. But I'm not the same person I was. You can't treat me like that anymore. I won't let you. Mark flinched at my words, but the anger was still there, just below the surface. I didn't mean to treat you like shit, Sarah. I don't know. I thought you were fine. I thought you didn't need anything from me. I shook my head. You never asked, Mark. None of you did. You just assumed. We all sat there, each of us in our own thoughts, the tension in the room thick enough to cut with a knife. I could feel the weight of their regret, their desire to make things right. But I knew they couldn't just apologize and expect things to magically change. They needed to do more than that. And so did I. I'm not asking for your apologies, I said, my voice steady. I'm asking for change. If you want me to help you, I will. I've done it before, and I'll do it again. But I'm not doing it as the person you think I am. I'm not some invisible failure who's here to bail you out when it's convenient. I've built something, and I'm proud of it. I deserve the same respect you give each other. There was a long pause, and I could see the wheels turning in their minds, each of them weighing what I'd said. The realization was there, but it was still wrapped in their pride, in their hesitation to fully admit how wrong they'd been. I want to help, I said softer now, but it has to be different. We can't keep pretending that everything's fine, that you don't need me. If we're going to move forward, we all need to be honest with each other. No more games. My father nodded slowly, the weight of what I was saying settling in. You're right, he muttered. We've been so caught up in our own pride. We never saw what you were doing. If you're willing to help, we'll listen. We'll do better. I looked at each of them, letting the silence linger just a moment longer. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was a start. A fragile one, but still a start. I'll help, I said finally, but only if you're ready to change. Months had passed since that day. My family had slowly and painfully transformed. There had been a lot of awkward conversations, a lot of grudging apologies, but they were starting to get it. My father now worked as a consultant for my companies, his pride slightly bruised but still intact. Mark, after swallowing his anger and embarrassment, was helping manage international finance for my tech company. He still liked to flaunt his investment skills, but now he actually listened when I gave him advice. And Laura? Well, she'd joined one of my retail brands. She'd learned the value of hard work, and though she still complained about long hours, I could see the change in her. She was finally starting to take things seriously. It was funny, really. After years of being the one they pitied, the one they thought had nothing to show for herself, I was now the reason they had a shot at redemption. But even though I'd helped them, I didn't let them forget who had made this possible. They weren't off the hook yet. Tonight we were celebrating my most successful year yet. The numbers were up, my brands were stronger, and I was finally seeing the full scope of what I'd built. It was the kind of night where my family would be praising me for everything I'd done. But I wasn't interested in the applause. I had no interest in being the star of the show anymore. That was for them, not me. They gathered around the big dinner table at one of the nicer restaurants, laughing, drinking wine, and talking about how far we'd come. It was a stark contrast to those awkward family dinners a year ago when they didn't even acknowledge what I had achieved. "You've really outdone yourself, Sarah," my father said, his voice a little warmer than it used to be. "You've turned this whole thing around." "I did my part," I said, glancing around at everyone. "But you all stepped up. You've worked hard, and you've earned your place in this." Mark gave me a sharp nod. Yeah. I know I was a pain in the ass, but you were right about everything. This business, your vision, it's bigger than any of us thought." Laura sat up straighter, her eyes meeting mine. "I didn't get it before, but now, I'm actually proud of the work we're doing." I looked at them, trying to keep my face neutral. It was enough. They were trying. They were no longer the same people who only saw me as the disappointment. They now saw me as something else, something more. I wasn't the black sheep anymore. I had reclaimed my power, and they knew it. They finally understood that my success wasn't some lucky break. It was years of hard work, persistence, and vision. They respected that now, even if they'd never fully admit it. As I stood at the center of the table, looking at the family I'd once felt disconnected from, I realized something. This wasn't just about their redemption anymore, it was mine too. I wasn't just helping them anymore. They were part of my world now, not the other way around. I didn't have to hide in the background anymore. I didn't have to be the invisible one. I was standing at the head of the table, the quiet force behind the scenes, but not in the shadows anymore. This was my empire, my future. And now finally, they understood that they were all part of it. The family had come a long way. So had I. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't alone.